My mother used to take me on the city bus to go downtown. We had to go to the back of the bus.
We're going to stand together. We're going to sing together. We're going to stay together. We're going to moan together. We're going to groan together. And after a while, we'll have freedom.
This day and time, it bothers me today to see still we're dealing with racism.
Good evening and thanks for joining us for this 25 News special uncovering our history. I'm Naya Gonzalez.
I'm Jarrell Baker.
And I'm Leah McNeil. Tonight, as we celebrate the achievements that African Americans have made in this country, we're highlighting our history rooted right here in Central Texas.
Black History Month grew out of Negro History Week, started by Carter G. Woodson, who's known as the father of Black history. In 1926, Woodson declared the week of February 7th to celebrate and raise awareness for Black history. But African Americans had to wait 50 years for that change. In 1976, President Gerald Ford officially recognized February as Black History Month.
Right now, our public schools and teachers are at war with politicians to teach Black history or not to. Whether it's critical race theory, social studies, American history, call it whatever you want, we have to have these tough discussions and educate our youth to move forward in a positive direction. Problems the Black community face can't be solved if we pretend that they don't exist, and fixing those problems means going to the root, unpacking and understanding our history to do better in the future.
Let's take a race perspective with the intention of sort of uncovering the places where we're missing that connection, that understanding of other people who don't make up the majority of our social context.
From the beginning of time, racism has plagued the Black community, shaping public policy. It's no coincidence that Black and brown people in this country face higher rates of imprisonment, have less access to things like health care, education, and affordable housing. Teaching or learning about Black history in these very systems isn't to divide people. It's actually to bring us closer together to create a more equal society.
Since its founding, the state of Texas had established this dangerous idea of racism, beginning with the buying and selling of Black men, women, and children.
And although the nation abolished slavery back in 1865, the racial attitudes towards Black people has continued for decades, along with generations of violent lynchings.
Tonight, we shared the stories of St. Majors and Jesse Washington, two of Waco's most horrific lynchings, and how they led to a larger movement for change.
For years, his death hung over the family just like a dark cloud.
What once was a family kept secret.
My mother and her siblings were brought up to not talk about him because of fear of retribution.
Is now being exposed.
I could tell it hurt her to talk about this.
76-year-old Nona Kirkpatrick remembers the story told to her by her grandmother, Mary Majors Green.
St. Majors was my maternal grandmother's youngest brother, so that made him my great uncle.
She says in the summer of 1905, Majors was arrested and put in jail.
It was a classic story of the South. A young Black man accused of raping a white woman.
Awaiting trial, Majors maintained his innocence, but on August 8, 1905, an angry mob broke into the jail looking for vigilante justice.
They took him down, dragged him down to what's known now, I guess, the Washington Street Bridge. And that's where they hanged him from the bridge, and then they shot the body.
Hundreds of lynchings just like that of St. Majors produced no consequences, eventually leading to one of the worst lynchings on record in Central Texas.
There's no good way to lynch somebody, but Jesse Washington's was the most horrific that anybody had ever heard of because they dragged his body, they burned him.
In 1916, nearly a decade after Major's killing, Jesse Washington was accused of raping and killing a white woman, Lucy Fryer, in Robinson. She was the wife of a farmer he had worked for.
Somebody said that they saw him near the place where the murder took place moments before.
Dr. George Harrison says Fryer was found bludgeoned to death inside her home.
And so it didn't go well for Jesse. as far as that's concerned.
He was arrested and put on trial. Harrison says the all-white jury deliberated for just 4 minutes before finding Washington guilty. Then an angry mob rushed into the courthouse, seized the man, pushing him in front of City Hall.
Stabbed and beaten as he went. His genitals were removed, and his fingers and toes were cut off.
Nearly 15,000 people gathered around, watching and cheering as the mob burned Washington alive, dragging him through the streets of Waco in black neighborhoods.
It brought horror to many. Of course, to the black community, it was a horror.
He was 17 years old. That is a kid by any definition.
No one really knows if Washington did in fact kill and rape Lucy Fryer, but Shannon Spitzer, Lucy Fryer's great-great-granddaughter, says even if he did, his death was wrong.
And what happened to him subsequently after he performed this terrible act was not justice, not even close.
Photos and postcards of Washington's lynching were sent across the country, eventually reaching the newly formed NAACP.
I think Washington was one of those things that sparked a preliminary movement toward the civil rights movement.
There was a national effort to pass a federal anti-lynching bill in 1918, and although it was defeated by white Southerners in the Senate, the culture around circus-like lynchings shifted. There were suddenly consequences, and people were held accountable for killing blacks.
It sounds like it takes monumental instances that we'll never forget to make other things happen.
Moments in time, sparking a movement to create a more just and more equal society. Strides have been made to right the wrongs of the past. In 2016, then Waco Mayor Malcolm Duncan Jr. held a formal ceremony to acknowledge and apologize for Washington's death. And the last 5 years have been quite the journey. In July, the Texas Historical Commission approved plans to honor Jesse Washington, St. Majors, and 41 other people lynched in Waco with a historical marker. The Waco NAACP and Community Race Relations Coalition say they've worked hard to honor the lives murdered, bringing Waco's darkest history front and center for those visiting City Hall. The groups say the marker will have an official dedication on May 15th. Looking at the scores of people lost to lynching is truly staggering. The NAACP says more than 4,700 people died at the hands of lynch mobs between 1882 and 1968. 3,400 of those deaths were black people. Texas ranks third in the nation for killings outside of legal proceedings, with at least 493 deaths. The advocacy group says 79% of lynchings took place in the South. You may think of lynching as an extremely horrific practice of the past, but they actually continue today. James Byrd Jr., Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd names that all come to mind when I think about modern-day lynching. In 1998, James Byrd was chained to a car by 3 white supremacists and dragged to his death in Jasper, Texas.
Ahmaud Arbery was shot and killed while jogging near Brunswick, Georgia. The 3 white men found guilty for his death claimed he was simply trespassing.
And George Floyd was held down by a white Minneapolis police officer in broad daylight with his knee on his neck for 9 minutes, suffocating him to death. Tonight, our Todd Unger examines modern-day lynching.
Looking back at the darkest moments of Waco history, it is hard to imagine what it takes to do this to another human being.
In Texas, violence was justified and celebrated in a way that I think was not common in other places.
Historian and Waco native Will Kerrigan says racism and its horror still exists.
At the time of Jesse Washington's lynching, and today you can see these parallels where people are saying, well, no, it's just a few bad people who did this.
That same indifference to human suffering from 100 plus years ago isn't too hard to spot in 2022 America.
It's not like George Floyd is the only black man ever killed by the police. Jesse Washington wasn't the only black man who was ever lynched, but they were particularly gruesome examples of a larger phenomenon, and the visual evidence in each case was remarkable.
It is a systemic problem, one hiding in plain sight.
How do you go from a lynching with 100 people to a lynching with 15,000? Well, on the way to that lynching with 15,000 are a lot of other lynchings in which time after time, no one does anything about it.
But he says documenting history in both cases can help inspire change and hopefully progress.
For Jesse Washington would not have had the same impact if it hadn't been for those photographs. And the same thing, if there had been no video of George Floyd getting killed, there's no worldwide movement responding to George Floyd's death. He still would have been killed, same exact way, same exact death.
Michael Dean was fatally shot by former Temple police officer Carmen DeCruz in 2019 after a traffic stop. DeCruz attempted to reach in Dean's car and take out the keys while his gun was drawn. Then the weapon fired and shot Dean to death. He was unarmed. DeCruz has been charged with manslaughter, but the trial has been pushed back multiple times. The family is hoping to have a trial later this year.
To see him brought to justice and to learn more about what actually happened on the night their son was killed. They have learned very little since they put him in the ground. They put him in the ground knowing very little about what happened.
In Killeen, Patrick Warren Sr. was fatally shot by Officer Reynaldo Contreras during a mental health call in January of 2021. The family called KPD for a resource officer to help Warren Jr., who was in a manic state.
Systems are failing mental health individuals. If you are suffering from mental health, I don't feel that mental health should lead to a death sentence.
Later that year, a Bell County grand jury decided no prosecution would take place against Officer Contreras. It's been over a year since the incident, and Contreras is still on the Killeen police force. Warren's family still looking for answers and wants the officer to be held accountable.
From slavery to freedom to civil rights.
So many have had a hand in the fight for equality.
We continue uncovering our history, sharing the story of a Temple activist shaping the next generation of leaders. That's up next.
Civil rights icons from the 1960s have paved the way for today's activists. Over a decade, the Temple NAACP president, Benny Walsh, has taken what he's learned firsthand from those leaders, now using it to build meaningful connections in the community and spark change, all while inspiring the next generation of leaders. Back in the 1960s,
mob action and civil disobedience, a state of emergency exists within the city of Kansas City.
Benny Walsh was just a kid. But as a person of color, he faced racism and hatred, issues much bigger than himself.
I have not always been on the right side of trying to make it.
He had drive, but lacked direction.
As a young man, I threw rocks through windows, broke out windows, destroyed stuff.
Wise words from his aunt, the president of Kansas City's NAACP chapter at the time, steered him in the right direction.
My auntie put it in my heart that you have to do something for your people.
At 13, from Kansas City to Chicago, Walsh began marching and protesting for his rights, listening to the leaders of the era.
It's not hate to say that we were kidnapped and brought here, it's true. It's not hate to say that we were Jim Crow, discriminated and segregated, it's true.
We aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around. We aren't going to let any injunction turn us around.
They're my heroes, the police, my heroes. And once they came together, it made a difference. It made a great difference in my life.
Combining the teachings of the greats, now sharing that with Central Texas.
Whatever is going on in the community, if I can get my footprint on it, I'm going to put my footprint on it because I want to be part of what's happening, especially when it comes to voting and voting rights.
A lot of us realize and recognize that the change that we want to see isn't going to happen by just protesting, but really getting involved and knowing what's going on in our local government. We've been known to go out to all kinds of events and register voters.
Younger community members now following his lead.
We don't care who you vote for. Our goal at Wake Up Temple is to really just empower you to do so and exercise that right.
Wake Up Temple, spearheaded by Terrace Goodwin, aims to promote nonpartisan civic engagement.
When we do or don't have turnout from typically underrepresented communities, then we see that reflected in the results of the election. And ultimately, if we don't participate in that process, then I don't feel that we have a right to, criticize or be upset.
Goodwin and her team ready to continue the fight.
I really truly believe this is the time for our generation to kind of pick up that torch and keep it running.
But to see young people following that path and doing what is right for the community, it brings joy to my heart.
It's a fight Walsh has been fighting for most of his life.
This day and time, It bothers me today to see still we're dealing with racism.
And doesn't plan on stopping anytime soon.
To follow what the Lord says, so until he says it's time for you to quit, I'm gonna keep doing his work.
Such a powerful story, Leah, and I'm so happy you touched on this because it really goes to show how important it is to make your voice heard, whether it's peaceful protesting or even at the polls.
And that's really how you make change, especially on the local level.
Now, voting is really one of the greatest tools when it comes to our democracy, yet thousands still take it for granted. Now, in fact, voter registration participation is extremely low in local elections, yet those local elections have a greater impact in our everyday lives. 2 votes decided the fate of the Temple election bond in November of last year. Now, of the nearly 80,000 residents, only 4,000 actually voted. The bond, worth more than $170 million, failed. It would have made upgrades to facilities and replaced portable buildings within Temple ISD. Now, despite unique challenges faced in 2020 with the pandemic, the 2020 election had the largest increase in voting between 2 presidential elections on record, with more than 17 million more people voting in 2020 than in 2016. But let's take a look at the numbers here at home. In McLennan County, they saw 66% of registered voters headed to the polls in 2020. That's nearly a 10% increase from 2016. Over in Bell County, they had a near 10% increase too, with 59% of those registered voters casting their ballots in 2020.
When you look at these pictures, what do you see? Now, some may say that they're beautiful. Others may say this is over the top or too much. Now, research shows that black and brown men and women are less likely to be hired for their job with hairstyles like these. Now, that's opposed to straight hair, shorter or tapered cuts for men. It's why many here in Central Texas are pushing the state legislators to pass the Crown Act to stop hair discrimination. Braids, twists, curls, and locks. All different types of protective hairstyles worn in the black community to protect our natural hair. But for generations, these styles have been deemed distracting, unprofessional, and inappropriate. From the workplace to schools, even our nation's military.
The discrimination that we've been getting is nothing new. That is old. A long time ago.
Local veteran LUVINA SABREE says she and several of her fellow soldiers were judged based on something so simple: hair.
They're not really hiring her based on her work ethic or her experience, or even him on his work ethic or his experience. They're discriminating against them just because of the way that their hair looks.
Yet it's much more complex. That's why SABREE created the Armed Forces Natural Hair and Health Expo. Since 2010, it's been an outlet for the community to celebrate black hair.
I love to see people happy, and I'm just a servant. And so when I get a note from a mom that says, oh, my daughter, she loved to see the women with the natural hair, and now she wants her hair natural, that's why I do it.
A small step toward a bigger change and acceptance, like the Crown Act, a bill that would ban educational, employment, and housing discrimination on the basis of hair texture or style.
Passing this type of legislation in the state of Texas will really bring us forward, and it will have an impact on all of our lives.
State Representative RHETTA Bowers is working to make the Crown Act law to protect people like Maddox Cozart, a biracial Troy ISD student who spent nearly 2 weeks in in-school suspension last year for wearing braids in his hair, violating a decades-old school dress code policy at the time.
It's disheartening because he's a child. A child shouldn't have to go through any of this over hair.
Maddox and his mother, Hope, testified alongside Representative Bowers and other victims of hair discrimination at the state capitol last year.
We needed that kind of backing so that they really could make what's happening to some of us a reality.
The bill did make it to the floor to be voted on this past session, but Representative Bowers, SABREE, and others plan to teach people about the legislation and why accepting our hair is accepting who we are.
I think once they familiarize themselves with it, they will no longer fear or feel uncomfortable about it because then they understand it.
When you get away from the fear of the unknown and you educate yourself, we'll be able to move forward in all instances.
When I was talking with SABREE and Representative Bowers, they pointed out that hair discrimination is a problem in our line of work too. I remember when I first started working in the news, I'd get some people saying to get a low cut because twists are unprofessional.
This actually reminds me of something, Jarrell. I don't know if either of you have experienced this, but getting a compliment that's actually an insult.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so all my life I've always gotten, oh, you have good hair for a black girl.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that one too, Naya. Yeah, same. I always get questions about if my hair is real and what I mix with because it looks too good to be black. Now, as working as a journalist, I've also heard you are so articulate. What does that even mean?
Yeah, it kind of gives the connotation that black people aren't educated or something. Yes, exactly. What about you?
Yeah, there's people who told me that, well, you're pretty smart for a black guy.
Yeah, so these are called microaggressions. Intentional or not, they can be hurtful because they point out false stereotypes about black people. Saying I have good hair for a black girl insinuates that all black people have bad hair, which is false. Clenching your purse or your wallet around a black person because you think that they might rob you. Again, it insinuates that all black people are violent or commit crimes, and again, that is a false narrative.
Absolutely. I know some people may be asking, how can I avoid being a microaggressor? Well, for starters, being aware of your own bias is key. Educating yourself and always asking why. Why do I think this way? Why does this person make me feel this way, even though I've never met them before?
And if you happen to commit a microaggression, it doesn't mean you're a racist or a bad person. It means you need to educate yourself. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and we're all learning. As long as you make a conscious effort to be better, you'll do better.
And speaking of doing better, the EW Scripps Company is committed to a diverse and inclusive culture that reflects the community we serve. Here at 25 News, we prioritize ongoing training when it comes to topics related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our own EDI committee has been working continuously to address our mugshot policy. The entire 25 News team in front, the camera, and behind has undergone unconscious bias and microaggression training to ensure we continue to present nonpartisan and unbiased news. Now, don't go anywhere. We have so much more.
That's right. Next, we're talking about mental health in the black community.
How a young girl from Compress Cove is spreading awareness and breaking the stigma.
Within the last few years, there has been a profound push for mental health nationwide. But in the black community, there is still a stigma about getting help. One young girl in Compress Cove is making sure mental health care is the top of mind in her community. Looking at her now, you see a young girl competing and winning pageants.
I won preteen Miss Five Hills.
Doriana Gilbert now confident in the skin she's in. But she wasn't always this way.
My platform of service this year is anti-bullying awareness. And I chose that because I used to get bullied.
Teased and taunted over things she couldn't control.
They used to say just rude things to me.
Until it was too much to handle on her own.
Once it started being a daily thing, then I just started to get more sadder and I had to tell someone.
So she turned to the only person she could.
Without her, I don't know where I could be right now.
Her mother. Shanada Gilbert hung on to every word her daughter said.
I have seen, friends of mine that kids have taken their life behind them being bullied in schools and stuff like that. But for her to feel comfortable enough to come to me and tell me so that we can handle it right then and there, that meant a lot.
Mental health not always a priority for Doriana's mom. Losing her own mother and time in the military changed that.
Me and my husband, we both served in the military, been overseas and stuff. So PTSD is something that we always talk to, with our children. In our community, we don't go to counseling. We don't seek help when we need it. We think we can just overcome it.
Mental health is just as important as the health and the strength of your body.
Yolanda Washington, the founder and clinical director of It's a Journey Counseling, says while black people have come a long way with being open to therapy, the stigma is still there.
Sometimes in the black community, toughness is looked at as strength. But behind that toughness, a lot of time, they're just trying to hold it up the very best way that they can.
However, Washington is optimistic about younger generations.
We want our children to grow and be well-rounded people. And so in order to start that, we have to start that early, saying, it's okay if you want to express these emotions.
So you got to sit there, you got to listen to your child. You got to be that support system for them.
The time her mother took to listen. sparked something in Doriana.
I started learning how to stand up, and I want other kids to know that it's okay to stand up.
Doriana expanding her anti-bullying campaign across the city of Copperas Cove.
Be the reason someone smiles.
And hosting the annual Suicide Prevention Walk, hoping she can be the change she wants to see.
I wanted to be the one to make everyone rise as one, and we're all just trying to make an impact on the world.
Mental Health America says over 7 million people in the U.S. who identify as Black or African American have reported a mental illness in the last year. They also found that Black and African American teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers. Black people are also more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia and are offered medication at a lower rate in general.
For generations, it's been a powerful force of unity and progress. After the break, we examine the history of the Black church and its impact right here in Waco. The church is so deeply rooted in Black history, dating back to slavery. For decades after the Civil War, Black churches like Tolliver Chapel Baptist Church in East Waco became a meeting place for political activism, plotting for justice and equality. Today, it's a beacon of hope, a symbol of how far we've come, and the foundation to continue moving the Black community forward. Outside these walls, the world can be harsh. But inside, you can find peace and restoration. Founded in 1895 by Reverend L. Tolliver, this church has uplifted the Black community for more than a century.
They were one of the first churches to have a pre-K, a kindergarten school.
Being a light in dark times, like segregation and injustice.
Across history, the Black church was that foundation. I mean, you go back as far as slavery period. I mean, that's where they found the hope. That's where they found the faith.
And now, a pandemic.
We welcome you this morning to our virtual worship experience.
Serving for 21 years, Pastor Jimmy Hunter is the second oldest tenured pastor at the church, seeing its transformation.
Tolliver has weathered the storms and been here. I mean, Tolliver was here when there was a railway that passed through here.
And impact in the community.
I'm seeing more and more persons are recapturing the essence of what the church was meant to be.
Faith is acting like
a place of refuge for spiritual nourishment and support in times of need.
We do outreach. We help people. We've done food drives where we have food for people to come get food. We do Christmas baskets, Thanksgiving baskets, so we're always helping the community.
When there have been certain serious situations in the community, we have, found ourselves present in those things. So the church has got to stay engaged with community and not segregated from community.
One of the major hurdles facing the coronavirus vaccine, getting people to take it.
Nearly 1/3 of Black Americans remain hesitant to get the vaccine.
Low vaccine rates, including among African Americans.
Nationwide, there was hesitancy in the Black community about COVID-19 vaccines, and we saw that same hesitancy right here in our own community. But Tolliver Chapel took the lead, providing education and encouragement. It also became a vaccine site to keep people safe. Longtime member Robin Irving says, no matter the issue, the church is there.
With everything that's going on, this is where we come to the church and God. We don't have anywhere else to go but to God and the church.
He can do it what no other power is able to do. Yeah.
Joe Bishop has been a part of Tolliver Chapel since 1976. He says here, you're not alone.
It's just a place you can go and come and feel all your burdens are relieved because you have help here. People here love you. This is a church, well, it's a family.
So whether it's racism, hair discrimination, police brutality, or even a pandemic, the church is the foundation.
Because when everything is gone, the church will still be standing.
For generations to come. for generations indeed. That'll do it for our 25 News special, uncovering our history. Thank you for joining us tonight.
You can find the full special online at kxxv.com or on your 25 News mobile app.
And don't forget to tune in tonight at 10 for more 25 News. Until then, have a good night.